One of the biggest challenges in concept designing within the God of War world is the fact that it is Greek mythology. So there's a range that you kind of have to keep inside of, because if you go too far, then it becomes Lord of the Rings or fantasy. You go too safe, and then it just becomes, guys in togas, and that's not interesting. Nobody wants to play a game like that. So that is the challenge, to try to find, you want to push and design something that is very reminiscent of mythology, Greek mythology, because in a lot, the other real challenge in Greek mythology is the source material and the available references that we have for Greek mythology is pretty limited. It is pretty much just guys in togas, and it's not as extensive as if you look at Roman, references and Roman mythology. So we definitely, borrow a lot from Roman mythology, even though it's supposed to be Greek mythology. But I think the challenge is to create something that is pushed and something that is unique, but when the player and the viewer sees these designs and sees the worlds, that they can still identify it as, oh, it feels Greek. So that is a common thing whenever we're designing something, whenever we're getting critiqued, whenever we critique each other, that we point at a design that somebody has done, and we can say that's an awesome design or that's an awesome environment, but it doesn't really feel Greek. It feels like Lord of the Rings, or feels starting to feel sci-fi even. That's when we know we went too far. So we have to pull back. So I think as a designer, that's always the challenge. Is always sometimes very frustrating too, because you want to make something just as cool as it can be, but you always have to pull back. I think the challenge in designing for God of War is because we're designing creatures that are familiar with the public. So for example, I designed the centaur character. Centaur, half man, half horse. The body has to be a horse. The top part has to be a man. So designing within those limitations or within those constraints, just by the nature of it, you can only go so far before it starts getting into he's looking like some horror creature or some Lord of the Rings creature, that kind of thing. He still needs to feel Greek too. So when I was designing that, I come up with as many iterations as I can, trying to push it as far as I can. I started incorporating some horse elements within the man portion, within his facial features, and just really big neck like a horse. So I try to very fluid, the horse, of course the body is going to be a horse, and then it merges into the man, but then it kind of goes back into horse a little bit, but retains the man feel. So that was definitely a challenging one. I think the end result, I was happy with the end result, and then I think Keaton, who was the modeler on that character, took it to another level, and then that's the first time we get to see, guts come out in the God of War game for that character, or for any character, I guess. So it's definitely a fun character to design. Just pretty much we're given an assignment of, you're to design the Minotaur or whatever mythological creature or character. So we're given that task, and then a lot of times as a designer, we kind of want to know more. We want to know as much information as possible before we start tackling actually drawing and designing, because we want to know who is he or she, and why does she do what she does, or what are the functions, what are they going to do in the game, combat considerations. So a lot of times when I get an assignment of a character, first thing I do is ask, whether it's Stig, the director, or whoever is in charge, who the character is, kind of ask all the questions, what is the character going to do, in what area are we going to see this character, why is it there, any history, the story of the character. And a lot of times they don't really have story. A lot of times, especially because this is a game, they just say we want it to attack with some kind of projectile weapon. That's about it. And you know it's a it's a it's a grunt character or it's a minotaur, you know. So I think part of my job as a concept artist, I need to kind of come up with my own story and kind of decide, okay, since they're not giving me who this person is, I have to decide, who it is and what's the backstory, you know, his motivations. So first thing usually what I'll do is like I'll do research, online. I'll read up on whatever the character is, if it actually exists, to kind of learn the story, even though it might not be completely applicable to God of War story. That's okay. And then I gather up reference material, like visual images. Like if it's a Medusa, then I'll like start gathering different types of snakes and different looking women or creatures, just anything that can inspire, the artist to, or me to like, what can spark my imagination. So once I gather up all the kind of mental, the references, and then I have the visual references, and then at that point, that's when I'll usually start just sketching, just really rough, just to get it out of my system and draw the typical one that you first think of, and then usually try to start pushing as you go in the second iteration, and usually come up with anywhere from, from 5 to 10 just really quick, just sketches. So once you see all that, because a lot of times you end up doing like one sketch and you kind of become attached to it and you're like, oh, that's kind of cool. This should be it, right? But then you can really push yourself to, no, let's do another one, and just keep on doing them until you feel like you've kind of gone the range. And then you usually realize when you look back at your first one, you're like, oh, okay, that's not the good one. So usually I'll end up doing like 5 to 10 sketches. And then from there, you'll show it, we'll show it to Stig and to the art director and the other people who are looking at it. And then they'll start like whittling it down, like, we like this, but we don't like that, or can you take this part and we like, join it with that other part. And then that process starts moving where you start whittling it down. So you start off big and start whittling it down to, a central design that you eventually get to, which is a long process, but that's the way it goes.